will people answer the phone when I call? That was like my biggest fear because, I gave that honestly, like that title was a big part of my identity.
Okay, very excited for this session of the Owner Mode Summit. I have my girl, Kahlana Barfield Brown. We were just joking about 10 years ago, me having a conversation with her when she was still in her corporate platform, but in a very good position in her corporate platform, by how much she's leveraged her access as an asset, which is the title of this conversation that we're going to dive into, which is for all the people who have achieved a level of corporate success as part of a platform. What is the model? What is the blueprint for leveraging that to build value in your own brand, your own asset that you can ultimately move into monetizing in a bunch of different ways? And so since our conversation back in the day when she was editor at large for beauty at InStyle magazine, she is now the founder and CEO of KBB by Kahlana, which is a fashion brand, a fashion line. She is completely on the entrepreneurial side, running business. And it's just such a great thing to see that evolution over the last 10 years. She's also a mom of 3 kids. She kind of is somehow figuring out, how to do it all. So Kahlana, thank you for joining us at the Owner Mode Summit. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I cannot believe that was 10 years ago. It's crazy.
At the time I was at Google, you came through and you were expecting a baby and we sat
up.
And now to see you continue to flourish and thrive and really, around this theme that this whole summit is about, which is ownership. It seems like that's been your true north, all along.
Yeah.
We're going to get there in a second. Let's maybe start off because we also joked about, you have a pretty substantial following on social media, even though you joined the industry before social media. And so you grew up in this whole era of where we are today. And we kind of get your thoughts on brand building and social now and today and what that looks like. But when you came in the game, it was really just a pure intention to be a part of something that you felt passionate about, and you were willing to pay a lot of dues and sacrifice to get to this place that everybody looks at now, and it looks so glamorous. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and your journey into the fashion industry to begin with.
Yeah, so I'm from Seattle, Washington, and then, I left Seattle to move to DC to go to Howard University, and that transition within itself was just life-changing because obviously, Seattle is, there are many of us in Seattle. I mean, I didn't grow up feeling so much like a minority in Seattle because I grew up in the inner city and there were a lot, where I grew up, it was Black. It wasn't until I left Seattle and got to DC where I was like, oh, this is Black, and, saw people who looked like me and just was so inspired. And, Howard was a whole, just a vibe on its own. I learned so much about myself, but I was really able to just express myself. And I majored in journalism. I'd always had a love for writing, but I also had a really strong love for fashion. And so I minored in fashion merchandising, did my 4 years. And after I graduated from Howard, moved to New York to intern for Essence magazine. And, all my friends, probably you, like everybody left Howard walking into, a great paying salary job. And I left walking into a $6 an hour paying internship. And, that was what I had to do to get my foot in the door. The fashion industry is very competitive, and even more competitive for a young Black girl trying to get her foot in the door. So I knew that I had to do what I had to do to get myself in. And I knew that, one thing that I could do is outwork anybody. So I was just like, just give me an opportunity, just get my foot in the door, and then I'll, finagle this after I get in the door. And so that's literally what happened. I moved to New York. I was sleeping on my line sister's couch because I was only making $6 an hour. And it was, that I look back and I'm like, I was so broke, but that I wouldn't trade that for the world. I think that that grit and that grind is what gave me really the juice to do what I do now, and really just it put so much to perspective, just the hard work that I took to kind of rise over the years throughout my career. But, you know, those early years of just hustle and grind, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, being the first person to get into the office, being the last person to leave. Then I worked a part-time job on the weekends in retail because I needed to be able to have money to buy clothes to look the part, you know, in the office. So it was just a constant grind. And I think another thing we talked about this, you know, I'm a Delta, Alpha Chapter Delta, and I think my experience of pledging at Howard really helped to prepare me. It was like a preliminary course, you know, to my career, because one thing that, you know, you had to do at Howard, like obviously Greek life at Howard is super competitive. You know, I think my rush had, I don't know, probably 1,000, you know, people at rush or more, you know, and I think that being at Howard, you had to learn how to speak up. You know, if you wanted to be noticed, there were so many people that wanted to be a part of these organizations, and you had to be fearless in that. Even when it's uncomfortable to go speak to somebody that you don't know, you had to have the confidence to do it, you know, and I think that that helped me in my career, where I walked into these offices. I'm the only Black girl, one of the only Black girls, and I see a fashion director who I'm super intimidated, you know, by, so scared of, but I want to learn from. So I had to have the courage and the confidence to go up and introduce myself and say, "Hi, I'm Kahlana. I'm new here. If you ever need any help, I'm here. I would love to assist you." That was scary, but I had to do it. You know, you only have one opportunity when you're in these rooms. And so, you know, I just took all opportunities to make myself known and to put myself out there. But yeah, that's how I started in fashion. And I kind of started as an intern and continued to just kind of grow and rise every year.
So let's dive into because the through line through this conversation is going to be risk and taking calculated.
Mm-hmm.
I can make the argument that you were gifted with some clarity about what you really wanted to do early.
Yes.
A lot of people didn't know. They honestly didn't know. It wasn't like, and then some people knew, but felt like it wasn't something that they could do because it didn't make enough money or whatever it might be. Family pressure. And, you know, I'm not paying for you to go to school in XYZ.
But that was me too, because I, for a long time, you know, I majored in journalism, but it took me a while to kind of figure out the fashion piece of it, because for a while I just felt like, A, I didn't see anyone who looked like me really in the fashion industry. So I didn't even know that this was a possibility. But B, I just was like, okay, fashion, is that smart enough? You know, do I look dumb, you know, working in the fashion industry? And ultimately it was the support of my family and my mother, who was like, if this is what you want to do, baby, do it, you know, and do it to the best of your ability. And so I initially really wanted to go into design, and I was like, now that's risky. So I kind of really shifted it and was like, let me figure out a way where it feels more safe for me, where I felt like, okay, if I get a degree in journalism, I can concentrate in fashion, but if that doesn't work out, I can use that degree another way. So that's the way I kind of, you know, worked it. But I was nervous to work in fashion because I thought about perception, and I had to kind of figure out a way that worked for me.
And I want to, we'll get into it in a second next. You enter into the room for the first time, right? First as an intern, and how you move, right? Because a lot of people tell the story of, a lot of people grind, right? But somehow you were able to separate yourself from the pack. And I would imagine hard work was just the first ingredient, but there's a lot of other ingredients which we'll unpack. But before we get to that, purity of purpose, right? Like you knew, and you were wrestling with how far do I want to lean in this direction. But when did you know that just on the inside, that fashion was, what was it about fashion that really inspired you to say, I know this is what I want to do? And then you're wrestling with, how do I incorporate this into, and when do I incorporate this into, you know, my job situation, et cetera. But what was your calling, you know, your calling into fashion? Where did that come from?
It really came from my grandmother. Like I grew up with the flyest grandmother. Our time together, like our weekends together was her picking us up, me and my sisters, taking us to Nordstrom, letting us pick out one thing, taking us to the Ebony Fashion Fair when it came to Seattle, her weekly, nail appointments. So I was around a black woman who was not only a leader within Seattle, a Delta, Jack and Jill, principal in the Seattle Public School District, but a woman who was not only a leader within the community, but like always looked the part. She was very big on the way she expressed herself with her personal style and just always putting her best foot forward. And so I had that example my whole career, my whole life. And she was somebody that always wanted me to embrace my personal style. So when we went shopping, she didn't, she didn't pick out clothes for me. I always was kind of drawn to what I liked and she supported that. And so I feel like even in high school growing, like I always looked different. I never wanted to dress like anybody else. I had super long nails. Like I would wear like this dark lipstick. Like I just had my own personal style, and fashion was a form of self-expression for me. And I always enjoyed it. Then when I got to Howard, you get there and you see all these fly black girls, right? And it's like you have the girls from Chicago that, put that on, and then the girls from New York and the girls from LA. And so when I got to Howard, when I was like, oh my gosh, like I am so inspired. Like I see so many young girls who look like me, black women, and I would say Howard really sealed the deal for me, because walking like every day, you wouldn't just throw on clothes. Like you got dressed for the yard. And so that was really for me at our HBCU. I don't want to say it was a fashion show because schoolwork was very important, but we put our best foot forward. And I think that we all expressed ourselves through our style, our personal style. So I think the yard at Howard was when I knew this is what I wanted to do for my career.
Love
For
that.
sure.
And I can
Yeah.
relate to that. And I'm sipping
Yeah.
from my bison mug right now. My brother, he went to Howard a year before me. And I remember going to homecoming as a senior in high school, going to the fashion show, walking
Yep.
around the yard, and like my mind was completely blown. Never to be changed like that ever again. I was a different
Yeah.
person when I got back. So the energy around fashion, I understand that. And that reinforced something that your grandmother instilled into you. So that was what drove you into this grind of I'm not making money, but I'm going to pay my
Hmm.
dues. I'm going to learn, right? And I'm
Yeah.
harder than everybody else.
Hmm.
What is the first room that you got into that
Hmm.
was, a marker of you making progress?
Wow. I think, well, when I first got to Essence, I think that is my first day on the job, I was like, this is what I wanted to do. Like, it was that whole goosebump factor. Like, I was like, I knew that this is where my career is heading. Like, being at a magazine and just the creative freedom, it was very much like you walk into, so I never had, it was corporate, but a creative corporate job. So everybody wore what they wanted to wear. Everybody expressed themselves and, dressed the way they felt comfortable. It's shiny, glossy, just creatives walking around, bouncing ideas off of each other. I just love the energy, right? And then it was like, okay, now it's time for me to once I got there, I was like, I'm going to do everything I can to make myself stand out. So I was just that intern that like would get there early, would stay late, was not above anything. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to go pick up your laundry? Yes. What time and where am I dropping this off? Like I was that girl. And I think the first time that I was actually called into a meeting with editors to get my perspective or my opinion on something, and I had to actually contribute to an idea around people who inspired me and who were these senior level executives, that was the first time that I was like, wow, I'm here, and I'm not leaving and I want to stay. And so I'm going to do everything I can to have a seat at this table. Yep.
How did you make yourself useful beyond what was in the job description?
I think it was just going above and beyond. It was literally that. It was like, this is a job description. How can I do more than this job description. So funny story, how I really got my like actual full-time job beyond interning, because I bounced around as an intern. I was at Essence and then I left Essence and went to InStyle. And that was so those two internships lasted a full year after I had my bachelor's degree after graduating from Howard. And I was making literally pennies. And then I was kind of, when I got to InStyle, I was a general intern. So I wasn't in the fashion department. I wasn't in the beauty department. I wasn't in the art department. I floated between all of the different departments whenever I was needed. So one day I would be in, entertainment department. That's like music, the editors that write about albums. And the next day I would be in the home department, the editors that write about candles and couches and everything that is in a home. And I would next day be in the beauty department. So that's all the makeup. And so I would bounce around, and the beauty assistant who assisted the beauty director, she went on vacation. And she went on vacation for 2 weeks. And so I always tell people that are young and starting off, in their career and their jobs, I'm like, never go on vacation for 2 weeks. You're too young. This is too early in your career. Like, you don't give your seat up that easily. And so that's exactly what happened. So she went on vacation for 2 weeks, and I filled in as her boss's assistant. I filled in as in her job. And I was like, I'm just going to do everything I can to make this woman know that she needs me to be her assistant, and she needs to fire the girl who went on vacation for 2 weeks. And that's literally what happened. So she would get to the office. I would get there. Our workday started at 10 a.m. I would get there at 8 a.m. I would have water on her desk. I would, whatever it was that I could do to show her that I could change her life as her assistant, that's what I did. And she was just like, wow, like I didn't know that she was, picking up what I was putting down, but I just was doing everything that I possibly could. And my internship ended maybe a month later, and I moved back to Seattle actually. And I was going to start in the buying program at Seattle. At Nordstrom. Nordstrom is based in Seattle. So I was going back to Seattle to get a job, to start a job at Nordstrom. And she called me right before I started my job. I hadn't even been gone for a week. And she called me and she was like, this is Amy Sennett from InStyle. Would you ever be interested in coming back to New York to be my assistant? It's like, absolutely. And they flew me back, and that's how I started my job. But she got rid of her assistant to hire me. And that was just for me going above and beyond the job description and doing the things that nobody else would do, really.
So let's do a quick checkpoint on some of the lessons that we learned so far. The first is, and I think a lot of people, because our audience are folks that in many cases have achieved a certain level of success and is recognized in their circle as being someone who's achieved success. Mm-hmm. And doing this analysis of here's where I am today versus where I want to spend my energy, the impact I want to make from a wealth creation perspective, right. How to attach my time for my money and build something of value. With you had the clarity of knowing what you were about, and it really tied into experiences that shaped you. A lot of people lose sight of. Mm-hmm. And then the second piece of it is you leaned into that, even though the money wasn't there. You were investing because you had a long-term vision of
yes,
what your life to look like and what you want to spending your time doing. The third piece of it is you made yourself indispensable. So basically, she said, I didn't even know what I was missing until Kahlana situation. And now that she's gone, I need this back. Mm-hmm. So the lesson here is, going over and above gives you actually freedom. It might be commitment at that moment, but it gives you freedom in terms of options. A very coveted opportunity with Nordstrom versus now being the call to get the assistant. When it boiled down to it and you were looking and weighing at these two opportunities, why was this assistant opportunity for you more compelling than the Nordstrom buyers program?
I never even wanted to move back to Seattle. Like for real, I was not trying to leave New York. It just got to a point where it was like, I need to make money. And so I was going to take that job, but I always wanted to be in New York. So it was a no-brainer. And it was so competitive to get in the magazine industry to like actually lock down a full-time job. And so, we looked at those opportunities like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So it was a no-brainer. It was my bags were packed before my flight was booked. So, I was just happy to get back to New York. And then it was like, okay, I'm ready to rock and roll. Now let's start. That was really the beginning of my career as a fashion and beauty editor. Yeah.
And this goes back to this idea of having a vision of the life you want to live. New York was central to that vision. And so
for sure,
for sure, it was going to unlock, opportunity for you that you were interested in.
And I feel like I got that from Howard, where, it was kind of like I learned at Howard, I wanted to be the biggest in whatever my career path was. It was like, I want to work in fashion, then you got to move to New York. There's no option. Don't move back to Seattle to try to get a job in fashion living in Seattle. Move to New York so that you can be the biggest and you can have the most possibilities. So, New York was always the plan for me. I had just kind of exhausted my internships and I was like, okay, I have my degree. My mom spent all this money on me to go to college. Like, I need a job. And so I was kind of settling by taking that job. But, it all worked out.
Little did you know that seeds you planted was going to come back around in a major way. Okay, let's shift the conversation now to what the core of this talk is about, which is access as an asset, right? So now you've earned your spot to be in these rooms. And I don't know what your vision was in the short, medium, long term. Maybe you could share that with us. But ultimately, you got into this ownership position and you got there based on relationships, information, et cetera, that got in these rooms. And so what was your playbook going into it beyond, okay, I want to be good at my job, but investing in yourself such that you were laying a foundation for the future?
I wish I could say, like, so many people tuning into this probably always have had a vision and just a foresight, like, I want to own my own business. I wish I could say that, but this really fell into my lap. I come from a very traditional family. My grandfather would always tell me, don't you leave that good job. He would talk so much about stability. And so in my magazine editor job, it was such a coveted job that, like, I didn't really see myself leaving. Like, I just saw myself continuing to grow and rise up the ranks, maybe one day being an editor in chief and retiring in the magazine industry, right? Because it really was a job for anyone who's seen The Devil Wears Prada. It really, that was really my life. But as a Black girl, being in this space where there aren't many of us, but it is very luxurious, flying, to Paris twice a year for Fashion Week, traveling with brands everywhere. And so it was very luxurious and fly, so I always loved my job and really didn't see myself stepping away from my career in the magazine industry. But I would say, let's see, maybe 2014-ish, things just started to change because social media became a thing. And at that time, so obviously, I'm an editor. So editors really dictate the trends in fashion and beauty. And so when social media really came around, things started to change because now you have, at this time, they were called bloggers, now influencers, but bloggers really just started to create content and it started to get a buzz. And I remember as editors, we didn't take bloggers seriously at all because for us, we're like, we're journalists. We have degrees. Like, we work with these brands. We're front row at these fashion shows. We're in the labs with the skincare companies. So we kind of, like, I'm not going to lie, like, we kind of laughed at bloggers. We didn't take them seriously at all. But shortly after, things started to change and it was like, oh, we're at Fashion Week and now these bloggers are being invited to the fashion shows, and I was like, okay. And then it was like, oh, wait, they're sitting on the same row as us now. And then it was like, wait, now they're influencers and they're sitting in front of us, so it was like, for me, it was like a light bulb moment where it was like, okay, I have been doing this for years. I have the relationships. I have the knowledge. This is what I do. I would be a fool not to pivot and brand myself and to take up space in this. I also have all the access. I'm going to the shows. I'm, getting sent every single product for free on the market. I am meeting with all the designers. This is content that I could be creating and access that no one else has, especially from a Black girl perspective. You know, I worked for a magazine, a mainstream magazine where Black women weren't, I didn't work at Essence. I worked at InStyle, which I loved being a Black editor there and to be able to write stories for us, right? But at the end of the day, I am a Black girl in a very white space, and I have the access to be able to create content to show and bring people into my world and show people what this is like, right? What is it like to sit front row at this fashion show? What is it like to go into a lab with La Mer to see how they make this special magical face cream, you know? And so, and also to talk about like the products that really work for us. That was a big part of kind of building my content. I had everything right in front of me. So all I had to do was take advantage of it. But in my industry, it was really about discretion. It was editors did not take pictures of themselves. We're on set with Beyonce at a cover photo shoot. We wouldn't dare pull out our camera and ask for a photo. It's like, I want her to respect me as an editor, as a journalist. I'm not a fan, really. You know, I'm a fan, but I'm not a fan in that way. In this, we looked at each other as, equals in terms of our careers, and just like, okay, I'm a journalist for this magazine. You are an artist. You're on our cover. We're doing work together, but I'm not pulling out a camera to make you uncomfortable or to even, make myself look like a fan. So that was unheard of to be creating content as an editor, right? I had to take that risk. I had to put myself out there no matter what other editors thought about me. There were two other editors in the industry that kind of started to brand themselves and create content. So they kind of gave me the confidence that I could do it. But when I tell you, it was very uncomfortable because I would be at an event and I had to pull out my phone, and everybody's looking at me like, why do you have your phone out? But they also knew why I had my phone out. They just didn't really have the courage to do it themselves, because I think that was the part. No one wanted to look like they were trying, right? And they also didn't want to start. It's like no one wants to just start from the bottom and then it's like you're exposed that you're trying. And I had to have the courage in myself to do that. And I just saw that because of my access, there was so much opportunity. And once I started, it just started to pick up and pick up and pick up. And that's kind of what got me here, truly.
Major keys in there. So let's unpack that just a little bit. So for the folks that are tuning in, we just heard, kind of a masterclass, so to speak, in how to transition access you have into capital for your personal brand. And we'll talk a little bit later around how you take that capital of your personal brand and put it to work for your own platform. But you looked around and said, I did the work to get into this room. And you took a step back and said, I have a story within this space that is unique and differentiated, and people need to hear it, and people should be inspired by it. And last time we had a conversation, you had written this article on colorism within the Black community that kind of went viral, right?
Yeah.
So the typical beauty editor, this was the because you took a step back and looked at the bigger picture and said, okay, I'm seeing influencers becoming a thing. What differentiates kind of the top influencers and others is access that I already have.
Right.
Make myself a little bit uncomfortable in this situation because editors don't act like influencers, right?
Exactly.
So I see an opportunity to be the first, right? And I'm taking on the risk of people looking at me a little bit crazy, but the upside on using my access, which in some ways was calculated risk, but it was not a lot of risk because you knew the access was going to get you to where you needed to be at the end of the day. And so it really wasn't so much as a risk as it was courage, to your point.
Yes.
Out there and say, let me do this move that I know will work, but have people look crazy. But then they're looking at being brilliant and and look at my IG account and see 1,000 followers.
Absolutely. Even my husband, like, he didn't want to take the pictures, like, but I was like, this is going to work. Trust me. I knew it was going to work. I knew. And then I had my line sisters and just friends who were like, bring me in. What did you wear to work today? I just want to see. Like, we want to see, like, people who told me, they're like, we want to see this. And I'm like, really? Because in the beginning, I was like, I don't need to prove what my life is because I'm living my life and I know what my life is, right? But they're like, no, it's not about proving. We want to see it. Bring us in. So once I just kind of got past the, not the fear of just really posting and people not really wanting to see what I was posting about, once I got fear of just like that and I got past that, the sky was really the limit. And I think too, access, I will say, is being, one of the only Black, women in this space and having access to celebrities. There was so much support from, Rihanna and Black women who I shot for our covers for the magazine. And, they show up at a shoot and they see me and they're, we just click off of just being Black women. And so their support, like they wanted to elevate me. They wanted to, they wanted to align and they wanted to support whatever I was doing. And I've made so many friends who, supported me in that space. So sometimes it really is just about putting yourself out there and, and just kind of putting that fear, getting past that fear, putting yourself out there and just believing in yourself. Like I knew it was going to work. I was just like, there's no one else. What my perspective is so different than what else is out here. And even just when I kind of started, because obviously I was this editor, so I grew my social. But then, and we can get into this later, but then I kind of became a business within my role, my corporate job, where brands were reaching out to me for partnerships, but I still was an editor, so it was just kind of like, even my content for a brand was different than working with an influencer because I am an editor and I do have the credibility to speak on these products with the right integrity and the knowledge about these products. So they saw me different than they saw an influencer. They saw me as an editor who created content. And so that worked in my favor too.
The best of both worlds. And,
Yeah.
the point that you made, which is when you stepped out there, you took that calculated risk. You ended up catching acceleration through tailwinds that wasn't even your calculus, which are people embracing you and
Right.
to actually get you more visibility and validation in terms of the strategy that you were already thinking was going to work, but was validated by other folks who amplified the results. And we'll get to the business in a second, but first we gotta dive in because this is near and dear to my heart, which is I've never been a social media person.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people who are watching this in their corporate gig, they just kind of, it's not who I am. I don't want to be out there. I want to be private. I don't have anything, to say that's going to be different. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to be trying too hard. It's all of these, kind
all the things. Yep.
Go into this whole thing. And so I just kind of fell back. I'm living my life, how I live it. But then I had to realize the hard way, Kahlana.
Yes.
Even in business, the resume is going from what used to be on that paper to now
your social media.
Exactly. And so you could have somebody who has a small fraction of the experience and credentials you have, but if they built that social media following up, they're going to beat you out in a lot of times. And I've been director for multi-billion-dollar organizations. They would look at two very qualified candidates, and a person who has built a social presence would edge it out because they would say this person understands how the world works. This person has a voice, that we can leverage, etc. Give us a little bit of perspective on, for the people that are really reluctant to get out there in whatever space they might be in, why they should do it, the tactics that you would kind of embrace in terms of how to think about it in a way that says, look, you need to make this move, even if you're hesitating.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that for me, I had to get comfortable with just like the pivot, right? So I had to kind of get out of my own head because I was exactly you. Like, I was just like, I am very private. I don't really want to bring people into my life. And I am still very private. Like, I put out what I want to put out, but I am not, I don't have cameras in my house following my kids, my husband. Like, it's not that type of party. No, that's not happening. So, for me, it was just kind of like, this is what the world is now, So whether or not, this seems like the most comfortable for you, I think it's like you have to do it, and the longer you wait, it's like the more advanced it gets and the more you're kind of getting left behind. So, just figure out what feels comfortable for you. That's what I did. Like, I I didn't look at what everybody else was doing. I created what I wanted my social media to feel like, and I wanted it to feel authentic to me. So I think the starting point is to be like, okay, this is what I feel. If I'm gonna do this, this is what I need. This is the way I need to do it to make it comfortable for me. Instead of looking and seeing what everybody else is doing, because once you try to do that, that's when it's going to be uncomfortable, because it's like, okay, well, I don't want to do outfit of the day every day, and I don't want to do that. That's not who I am. Don't do that. Like, figure out a formula that A, you can be consistent with, and that B, you feel comfortable with, but you do need to do it. I think it's very important for personal branding. Like you said, it's not that piece of paper anymore, your resume. If I'm looking for an assistant, my first thing is, okay, what is their name? And I'm going straight to their Instagram, to their TikTok, to their LinkedIn. You don't even need to send me a hard copy of a resume, because, I can look on social media and kind of get and find out all that I need to know. So, I think it's just kind of like get out of your head and figure out what feels comfortable to you. It might just be, it might be like, I don't feel comfortable speaking on camera, and don't figure out a way not to do that. But I think it's just like figuring out your formula and sticking with it. And for me, that was, kind of differentiating what I did from what everybody else did. And so that I had something that my agent could say, this is what she does. This is what makes her different from her and from everyone else. And that worked for me.
And your timing is different. You're in kind of the leading edge of culture, so you're early, right? But I'm saying, as a business person, I'm seeing the same dynamics coming into our space. And so people might say, oh, well, that's specific to fashion. That's not the case. So let me ask you this next question, which is, and it's funny because in business, particularly like with AI, a lot of people can build anything at this point. Used to be, I need to hire a CTO, engineer.
Right.
And now distribution is now kind of the choke point, whereas you're the best thing in the world. How do you break through the noise? And so what would you say to people that are saying, and you kind of hint on this a little bit, it's closed now. Like, all the influencers who have 350,000 followers, nobody cares about what I have to say. How can I break through? How can I compete? How can I emerge through all this noise nowadays?
I think that it's just, you just have to start. And I will tell you that looking at an influencer with 350,000 followers, million followers, versus a micro influencer, someone with 10,000 followers, sometimes that influencer with 10,000 followers has more impact. And I can tell you that now, as a business owner who works with influencers, who sends product to influencers, the return on the investment oftentimes comes with those smaller influencers, because I think that the community is just more close knit. A lot of times when you grow so big, it's like people follow you, but they're just scrolling. They want to see what you're doing, but they're not really engaged in what you're doing. But when you're kind of like the little engine that could, a lot of times it feels more authentic, because a lot of times it is more authentic. You're not being paid to say something. You're really just posting what you're passionate about. And I think your community just rides a little bit harder. So I would say, like, don't look at the numbers, and now you can hide like counts. You can do all these things. I would just say, like, put your stuff out there. Put your stuff out there. It's not going to hurt. No one's going to be looking at you like, oh, you're trying. Like, I think a lot of times we get so much in our own heads when it's like, people aren't even thinking about you like that. Just put yourself out there and start, and don't worry about the followers. Don't worry about the likes. Just put your content out. For me, it's like quality over quantity too, making sure that what I put out, I feel good about. So if no one sees it, I saw it and I felt good about it. That's all that really matters. And just keep doing that, and it will grow, and it will begin to start its own life. Like, I just remember from starting from the beginning and like having no followers and no engagement to just like being consistent. And then seeing the consistency pay off over time, and just like not over consuming myself with it, just kind of doing it. And so I would encourage everybody to just start and to make sure what you're putting out there is authentically you and you feel good about it, and just releasing it and moving on.
One more question, and then we'll get into how you parlayed this in a major. Give people a mental model, because you mentioned a couple of kind of things that I think people need to interpret a little bit, which is consistency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you also mentioned quality over quantity. And then ultimately, I'm sure for you especially, like there's a system involved to kind of
Yes.
this consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a way to think about quality versus quantity, the
Mm-hmm.
baseline of consistency,
Mm-hmm.
and are the maybe top pointers you would give just around the systems that people should have in place to ensure that they're giving quality in a consistent way over time?
Yeah, for me, I think the quality part for me comes from just like my magazine editor background. So, I am a magazine editor. So everything had to look and feel a certain way for me. And I almost looked at my IG as my own personal magazine. It's like, yes, I work for this magazine, but if, I work for a magazine, but if I were to have my own magazine, my Instagram is what that looks like. So, for me, the beginning was investing in a camera, and just like having a good quality camera so that my pictures aren't blurry. And, now iPhones, the camera technology is so great. You can use iPhone, and sometimes iPhone pictures get even better engagement because they are more real than overly, glossy photo. But I invested in a camera, and then, I just I when I posted, I just made sure whatever I was posting like really kind of circled back to whatever I was super passionate about, and whatever I was like. For me, if there's a common thread in my Instagram is in just my work in general, like I'm very, very, very Black, like I show my authentic self. I felt like in my corporate job, I was always a Black woman, but like my Instagram, it was just like, okay, I can play the music that I want to play. Like I just, and I knew that like it would resonate with the people that follow me. I talked about the things that I'm passionate about. I talk a lot about HBCUs. I talk a lot about young Black girls. I talk a lot about just the things that mean something to me, but I'm also like showing my clothes and showing my style and my personal style and how it's uniquely different from anybody else's. So, I just had to figure out the content that mattered to me and that felt real and not performative. Like I'm doing this just because everybody else is doing it and this is how they're going viral. I never looked at it from that perspective. And sometimes like the quality part would be the part that like held me back because I wasn't putting anything out there if I didn't feel good about it, So it would be like, okay, I haven't been able to be consistent for 2 weeks because I don't have nothing that is worthy, to post. So like I just too like I really feel like if you're posting, make sure it's like you have something to actually say or something that don't just post just to be posting. So I had to really sit down, and then eventually I grew to the point where I needed help, and I hired an assistant. I hired someone who could help me with that content, and that investment like paid off, but it just over time, just take baby steps. But I would say the quality, not only content, but just even just like the meaning and the purpose behind what you're posting, like that will help you stand out, and that will also help you feel good about what you're doing. So it doesn't feel like a chore because what you're posting about is meaningful to you.
Well, you took the culmination of all that work and you built a brand that then existed alongside your editor role at one of the top fashion magazines in the world. You mentioned that this brought opportunities your way. Just help us understand how that dynamic played out between you work for this company, you're making money over here,
Yeah.
platform. Do they have a say? Do they not have a say? You care about how they not? Because this is real. If you're using your access as an asset,
yes,
there'll be a point where these two things must coexist, and you have to figure there's the right balance. Tell us a little bit more about how that.
Yeah. So for me, it was definitely a thing because at the time, editors, I don't want to say we weren't supposed to be on social media, but they kind of like they didn't encourage us to grow our own personal brand at that time. Now I think that they actually would love for you to have your own personal brand. But I was, in the beginning, it is always different when you start. So there were a lot of people. It was like I was celebrated because brands were coming to, to the magazine and wanted to work with me specifically. But at the same time, I think that there was a lot of resentment from some of my coworkers. Like, I don't think everybody was like happy. I think some people were just like, really, like, just they felt like they were kind of getting left behind. They were like, they wanted to tap into it, but they didn't know how to. And so I felt that energy. I did for sure. But they didn't have a say. I did have to when I very first started, I would run any opportunity past my boss. This opportunity, and she was really cool. And it got to a point where I knew that I had to make a decision where it was like, I'm not going to be able to stay in this job for too much longer and basically be running my own company on the side. Like I knew. And I knew that if I had to pick one, as much as I loved magazines, I was making so much more money on my personal projects and partnerships than I was in my job. Like truly, I was. And so I knew that like I just was gonna have to take a chance and bet on myself. And so that's exactly what I did. And to be honest, when I made the choice, I was like, okay, I can't hold on to this job and do this. And I knew that I had to leave. When I made that choice, that is when everything went up. Like
Mm.
once I fully put my all into it and was like, this is what I'm doing, that's when all the gloves came off. That's when everything started to, really pop off for me. Because when I was in the job, there was only so much I could do. But once I was like, this is what I really want to do and this is what I'm going to do. I was able to put all of my attention in it. I was able to get a full team. Opportunities were coming left and right. And that's when it all really began.
And it's funny because that trend you noticed when you finally stepped out, the legitimacy of the InStyle platform was less so than the legitimacy you had built on your own for your
Yes.
platform. So the thing that you thought was what made you legit,
Yep.
you identified a trend that actually replaced that, and your
It
legit
did.
became attached to you, not your brand, which I think a lot of people in the audience
Yeah.
are in the opposite situation, right?
Right. Like what I thought is what gave me fear to leave. I thought, my Kahlana, that signature in my email, I could pretty much get anything. Sending an email from my InStyle account, no matter if it's a hotel, whoever I'm reaching out to, I could get a yes. I could get access to. And my fear was when I don't have this, will people respond to me? Will people answer the phone when I call? That was like my biggest fear because, I gave that honestly, like that title was a big part of my identity. Now I look back and I'm like, don't ever let this job be your identity. But it was, if I'm being honest, I would lead with that Kahlana from InStyle magazine. Like that was my, elevator pitch. And what I realized when I left, those relationships that I built over those, that decade that I was in, at that magazine, those don't just go away. They really don't. And I had to give myself more credit. I had learned that I needed to give myself more credit in what I did in my role, who I was, the way I treated people. I sent emails right after I left and everybody responded. It did not go away. So it really, was a lesson for me in believing in myself and who I am and not letting a title make you, So it definitely was, a learning opportunity for me to learn that, you're going to be okay. Like you're going to be even more than okay when you walk away. You just have to have the courage to do it.
From a timeline perspective, you said you were at InStyle for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
In those 10 years, when did you kind of start your social media presence? And then how long after that point would you say it was time to leave?
2 years. It was 2 years. Yeah, like 2 years. I think it was 2 years into from like kind of when I start like open my IG to leaving. It's maybe 3 years, but in the beginning, I wasn't like fully into it. I was just kind of doing it, but like I would say the last 2 years I was really into it, and probably the only 1 year of me kind of truly kind of doing like brand partnerships while I was in my role before I left.
And what was, you mentioned you got to the point where you were making, because here's the other thing. There's not money in the magazine industry. And you can make the argument of, was it in decline? Was it not?
Right.
It's you're wagging onto something that was growing and expanding. And so there were a lot of
Hmm.
perks and connections. As you mentioned, like your biggest fear was, are people going to pick up the phone when I call?
Hmm.
And that to be true. But from an economic perspective, you had already proven that this was going to be promising for yourself. So
Right.
when you made that full kind of step out there and you're now managing, you're the CEO of Kahlana Incorporated.
Hmm.
What was different about how you approached it versus when you were at InStyle?
Well, I think for one, I'm like truly representing myself, and I did invest in an agent too, so that was like another thing. So I had help. It wasn't like I was just out here by myself, but I had an agent.
And by the way, just explain. And again, a lot of folks here aren't
Hmm.
necessarily fashion. The importance
Yes.
of an agent. What does an agent get you? And is there a analog for that that people should be
Hmm.
thinking about in business or
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah. For me, so I, to be completely honest, I realized that so I'm in the beauty space, right? I'm a beauty editor. I'm working with all these beauty brands, and I'm seeing all these beauty influencers, and I'm seeing they're on trips, they're doing all of these things, and and they're getting paid. And I have a lot of friends who were publicists within these beauty companies that were telling me what these influencers were getting paid. And friends who were telling me like, you need to do this. Like it was a lot of friends saying, you need to do this. There is space, there's opportunity, and there's enough money for everybody. You need to do this. And I'm going to connect you with this agent who is getting all these people these deals. And so that was kind of what happened was like, okay, well, I'm going to work with an agent who has a track record of like access to these brands and these partnership deals. So we met while I was, at InStyle, maybe my last year before she was really the reason, one of the reasons why I left. But, I signed her a year before I left, and like she showed me what she could do. And for me, I didn't come from like a business background, so like I'm not really the most comfortable talking about money. Definitely not negotiating deals. I don't want to pitch myself. I don't want to do any of that. I want to be the creative. I need somebody to do all that. Take me out of the conversation, like when it comes to budget and I don't, negotiation. Like none of that was like like for me, I wasn't comfortable with doing any of that. So I knew that I needed somebody to represent me to handle that for me. So for me, that was the value of having an agent, not only, having someone bring work in for me, but also somebody that understood what I like, who I was and why I was different from who everyone else who was out there, and someone who had access and relationships to know where the checks are. Yeah.
And then this is a great segue into what happens next, which is you did a pretty significant brand deal, right? And
Hmm.
that laid the foundation for what you're doing today, which we'll get into in a second. But on
Hmm.
the agent front, I would imagine it's mutual selection. You will have
Hmm.
had to have achieved a certain level of success,
Yes.
space, whatever that might be, for them to
Hmm.
even consider you as a client. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, if you decide to work together, whatever they bring in, they get a piece of. And that's how it's
Yes.
our line.
Hmm.
Could you give us a little sense of how do you know you're ready to have this conversation with the equivalent of an agent in whatever space you're in?
Yeah. So for me, I had grew a significant social media audience when I first started to have the conversations with agents. I wasn't where I am now, but as an editor, it was a pretty significant audience, and so I took the meeting, and I was very different from a lot of the so my agent, she reps a lot of influencers, and she took a chance on me too, because I was an editor. I did not, I wasn't creating content, and I still don't consider myself an influencer. I still consider myself an editor, who makes content, and consults and does all the things with brands. But, I was very different from her, for her too. And so she was taking a chance on me as well. But what she looked for was just kind of like what made me different from, I think, her roster, and so me being an editor, me having the credibility, like all of that helps. So I think it's kind of like just knowing, what makes you special and what makes you different from what's out here. And that was really kind of what I think got me the first meeting, and I kind of went from there. But I think for me, the investment was great because, hey, here's the other thing, like your agent doesn't make money unless you make money. So they're getting a percentage of your fee, but it's, if you're not working, they're not working, they're not getting, a check either. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me. Some people are like, I don't want to give somebody this piece of, but for me, I was like, I don't want to do that myself. I need somebody who has access and can help to help build my brand and help put me out there and tell me what opportunities are out there, represent me. And so I have a agent, and then later I got a manager too. And the manager is more strategy to how to build your brand. Your agent is really negotiating the deals. Your manager is helping with your branding and your strategy. And then I have an attorney who, protects me legally.
Got it. So you had already done well in terms of getting brand deals coming your way when you were with InStyle. When you stepped out on your own, you were now able to be even more authentic, kind of bolder in terms of how you express yourself, maybe more selective, lean in certain brands based on resonance with you, etc. But this team you put together took you to a whole nother level. So let's talk about kind of a deal that was brought by you creating this team, you executing on your part of the equation. Give us this transformative deal that kind of changed and brought you full cipher over to Kahlana, the business owner, the brand.
Yeah. Yeah. So honestly, what happened for me, I as an editor, I had already left, but I was still doing a lot of kind of panels and consulting with brands. And I think it may have been Black History Month in 2020. I went to speak on a panel. It was a mix of editors and influencers in Minneapolis at Target's headquarters, and kind of just talked about literally what we're talking about, all the questions of kind of building a brand and just the, social media space. And I met the Target team at that meeting. And afterward, I met, a woman, and she was like, would you ever want to work with Target? In the future? And I was like, of course. And she was like, okay. And I didn't think anything of it. Fast forward months later, she called me for an opportunity. And this was to be, their first design partner for this new brand that they were starting called Future Collective. And it was just a much more fashion forward, young, trendy line of clothing that was owned by Target, but they were partnering with different content creators, influencers, editors for various collections. And they wanted me to launch the brand. And so this was, huge, because especially at this time, like there, people had lived for Target collections. They would do different collections with different designers, but this was great because it really was much more fashion, much more fashiony than the selections that they had in the past. And I got to do it under my vision. And so that really was kind of the start of where I am today. I did this collection with Target. It took off. Black women supported me like it was beyond. And I have 4 collections. They sold out, and it was huge. And so once that happened, that also gave me the confidence to see, like, wow, if I could do this for Target, what would it look like if I did this for myself? And that was the beginning of me building my own personal clothing line.
Let's talk about that and start with the amount of time between when you got that validation. This reminds me a lot of Virgil Abloh and the 10 collection at Nike, which
Yeah.
them up, right? It was great for them from a collaboration perspective and great for him finding
Hmm.
other collaborators and showing what he could do. For you, when you finished that particular project, how long was
Hmm.
it between you mentioned the seed was planted, but until you actually started building your own collection?
Literally right after. So it ended in 20, so we started launched in 2022. In 2023 I was ready to rock and roll because they had approached me about doing it again. And my mentor, like I knew, I was like, okay, I could do this again. And I have a mentor who was like, nope, ownership. She's like, the next thing you do, you need to own your brand. You can continue to collaborate and collaborate and collaborate, but after a while, it's like, you need to be collaborating for yourself. And so she was like, I don't think you do it. I think you start your own brand. And so this was literally right after, because they had approached me about doing another collection. And I was like, you know what? I think I really want to do my own thing. And not only, I mean, the ownership part was huge, but it was also like Future Collective was still a Target owned brand. So I was under constraints. There was only so much I could do within their parameters. I did the best that I could do, but was it my best? No. Was it the possibility of what I wanted for my own brand? No, it was the commercial version of what I could do, with their, using their fabrics, using their materials, like just staying within all of the their sizing scale, like their fit, everything was very Target, but like kind of with my stamp on it. And so I knew that the next thing I wanted to do, I wanted it to be authentically me. And so, that was when I was just like, I'm going to do it.
Reminds me of Jerry Lorenzo in Adidas, how he was kind of working in these constraints and he was trying to get his
Mhm.
creative vision. The more pure you are about your vision, the tougher it is to fit within these parameters that, you're working with a big brand that has quarterly earnings and everything.
Yeah.
So, what is the difference between being an owner and a collaborator from a, challenge and opportunity perspective? Like you are now in this seat, you have gotten to the promised land, but it's not all rainbows and rabbits and daisies.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's definitely not. And it looks like it is, but it really isn't, because, collaborating, it's like, I got my certain rate for that, and that was it. Everything else they paid for, they funded. With being an owner, you fund everything. You fund everything yourself. And yes, I have a purchase order, and you know, my retailer buys into my product, but I have to, if something comes up, I'm not calling my retailer. I have to put out fires. I have to fund everything. And so that is a big difference. Just like, you are now responsible for every single thing, and you have to be able to make quick decisions. And, things may, be great one day, and then the next day, you're putting out a fire. And so it is really, it's really, really, really a lot, but it is also rewarding to do it myself, and for it to be mine, and not me working for somebody else, and somebody building up somebody else's legacy and not my own, and having something that I can hand down to my children that I own. That was really important for me, but it is not easy. It is not for the weak. It really isn't.
And this is the full kind of manifestation of this, access as an asset. You went from intern to unpaid, basically unpaid almost, to
Hmm.
in the rooms, seeing the trends in terms of where the world was going, building your own brand, parlaying that into a collection, and then with mentorship saying ownership is where I need to be, and that's where you are today. I know we got to
Mm.
close out, but one last question for you, which is, now that you are where you are, I'm curious, what are your reflections on generational wealth and taking calculated risks, particularly for this audience who, good job, right? And they
Mm.
have aspirations, right? It's not for the faint of heart what you're doing, but
Yeah.
aiming for something bigger. And also, like, what does the future for you look like? Because you still have a lot of ammo in the tank and a long way to
Hmm.
go in terms of
Yeah.
runway. So, what are your reflections on lessons you can share with us? Taking a step back on calculated risk, and then
Hmm.
for you and how you're thinking about, your manifestation of the next level of Kahlana.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, ownership is amazing, but I also don't necessarily think it's for everyone. I think it's like you have to really I don't think you should just start something just to start it. I think it's like find something that if you want ownership, find something that you're super passionate about because I think when you're just doing it just to do it, like it shows. But when you're doing it for a reason and for the love of something, like that shows too. So for me, owning this clothing brand means so much to me. It's very authentic to who I am. It's very authentic to my style. And I also, you know, I saw a gap, in the industry, in the fashion industry where there weren't many options for high quality, really nice quality clothing at an attainable price point. And that has a really inclusive sizing scale. Like I came in fashion where if you want a piece of clothing, if you're plus size, like there's only so many stores that you can shop at, and a lot of times those pieces aren't the most fashion forward. I wanted to change that. So I would say find something if you really want, if you really want to own something, like find something that is going to make things easier for people. And that's what I did with this brand. But I think that I've learned so much about just kind of like I've learned so much about business and I'm still learning, and so I think it's like having that open mindset of being like, you're not going to get everything right. And every day you're going to learn something and every day is going to be a challenge and you're going to, learn things and things are going to be great one day and just know that it's a roller coaster. But the end result is super, super, super rewarding. Just having something to pass down because I care a lot about my legacy. So for me, I would say if this is something that you want to do and you want to step into ownership, do it. But find something that you're really passionate about, something that's going to help people and change the game, not something that's already and overly done. And then just go for it. It's like you never know until you put yourself out there, until you try. Like for me, I could have had this idea in my head and just kept it in my head and waited for a time that felt safe. And like no time is going to be safe. Every time there's no right time for anything. You just have to do. And so, that's what I did with this. And that's what I would encourage everybody to do with your personal brand, social media. Just do it, and see what happens and then go from there.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
There you have it. And so Gravy Wealth, my platform, the same way Nike puts, athletes into this light. That's what we're doing for entrepreneurs and owners like you, Kahlana. So please, everyone, give her a virtual round of applause for joining the summit and dropping these gems. Please support KBB by Kahlana. Because she's building brands and shapes and sizes for the folks in this audience, and she's just getting started. So with that, Kahlana, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate you joining us for the Owner Mode Summit.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Okay.